Perfect. Well, welcome everybody to Mar Talks, Parenting Beyond Power, using connection and collaboration to transform your family and the world. My name is Carrie Keevers. I am the founder of Moms Against Racism Canada, and I am joining this space as a mom of three kiddos that are 10, 8, and 6. I also am biracial, Black presenting, with ancestry from Africa, most likely Mali and Nigeria, as well as Swedish, Irish, and English on the other side of my family. I am also neurodivergent with a neurospicy household, so that factors into everything that we do. There's a very good chance that one of my little neurospicies will come and try and interrupt this morning, but that's just the way it is when you're a mom and you're doing all of the things. And I am actually today, I am not in my usual location, but I am still very blessed to be coming to you from the unceded traditional territory of the Lekwungen people, which is now known today as the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations, which is the area that is colonially referred to as Victoria, BC. And that's where my home is too. And so for those who are just joining or who might be watching the recording later, I'll tell you a little bit about MAR. So MAR, or Moms Against Racism, we're a Canadian nonprofit organization, and our mission is to educate moms and other individuals in kind of those mothering, caring roles in anti-racism, cultural competence, and decolonization, so that they can really start to develop those tools on their own, and that we can continue to support them to be able to bring those conversations to their families, to their workplaces, to their communities, so that we can together dismantle racism. But that happens both within ourselves and systemically and societally. And so for today, our Home Mar Talks series has been generously funded by the Government of Canada. So thank you so much to our funder for this, because we have had some wonderful people like Jen and Lucinda come and share their lived expertise with us and share their knowledge that has really helped us in our understanding of racism, in our understanding of ourselves, and our understanding of these power systems that are at play, so that we can really be those adult figures and those parents that we want to be for the next generations. So our conversation today with Jen and Lucinda is, exploring what it means to parent beyond power. And so I really enjoy the relationship that I am building with Jen, and her knowledge and expertise, and the tough questions that she gives me back to help me like noodle on things. And it's definitely helped me help and is helping me become a better parent to my kiddos. So very excited about our conversation today. And so with that, Jen, can I pass it over to you to introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for setting up the conversation and framing it. My name is Jen Lumanlan. I host the Your Parenting Mojo podcast, which has been downloaded almost 4 million times. I live on a lonely land in Berkeley, California, but right now we are in our final day of house sitting for friends in Albuquerque. And that is traditionally Piro land, I believe, among other groups that are here. We have a bird who we're also house sitting, who may make an appearance auditorily in this episode too. I use she, her pronouns, and I identify as a white person. I'm English originally. I moved here 20 years ago, still say centrifugal, and English and German extraction. So I am really excited to be here and talk a little bit more about what it means to move beyond the sort of the idea of talking with our kids about race and actually living in ways with our children that work to dismantle white supremacy. Lucinda, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Lucinda. I use they, them pronouns. I'm non-binary. I am a parent to 2 9-year-olds. They are twins. And I work in outdoor education for young kids and their caregivers. So a lot of my work around inclusion has made its way into my work throughout, working with Jen for the last almost 6 years, starting by listening to podcast, and then, everything she offers, I'm like, yes, yes, I'm game to try and fail and try again. So yeah, and I'm on Piscataway land here in the state of Maryland. And I'm white. My children and my spouse appear white and have Indigenous ancestry that they are working together to try to sort of uncover and understand. So we have sort of conversations about that privilege of them sort of appearing white, and then also the reasons that they don't have access to information about that side of their family. So that's something that I'm trying to support as a person who doesn't have those identities. Oh, and I'm also queer. I don't know if I said I'm neurodivergent, but my family, my household, when you were talking, Gary, about yours, like I was like, yes, same. So yeah, yeah.
We tend to collect each other, right? We move in herds. I love it.
Yes. Yes.
Well, fantastic. Thank you both for sharing your time with us today. And I'm excited to listen to all of your insights too, having worked with Jen for longer than I have. I'm a baby in this, in working with Jen. Okay, so I wanted to, we have a series of questions for Jen and Lucinda. And then if we have some time at the end of this session, we'll open it up to the audience to ask questions. But if there's something that comes up for you as we're going through our conversation today, and something comes up that is relevant to what Jen or Lucinda or I are talking about in that moment, feel free to pop it in the chat. We'll do our best to kind of monitor that at the same time. I'm not always the best at that, but we'll do our best. And if we don't get to it in the moment, then we can come back to it at the end. Sound good? Perfect. Okay, so Jen, I wonder if you can tell us about your book and why you felt, with all of the parenting books and advice that is already out there, that you needed to write this particular book.
Yeah, and I realized in my introduction, I forgot to mention I'm actually a parent as well. And I am. My daughter's 10 now. She just turned 10. And also, I'm also neurodivergent. I discovered I'm autistic as a result of doing a podcast episode on the topic, which was an interesting way to discover that. So yeah, why this book? I guess it was a real journey. It was definitely not something that I had thought I would do a number of years ago. It was actually a conversation with a fellow podcaster, Malika Dower, who runs the now defunct podcast, How to Get Away with Parenting, which I always thought was the best title. And she identifies as Black, and she and I had some conversations. And at one point I was kind of exploring the idea of doing an episode on the trauma that has been inflicted on Black people as a result of slavery. I'd been looking at kind of intergenerational trauma more broadly. And she, oh, so gently, way more gently than I deserved, kind of said, Jen, have you ever examined the role of whiteness in your life? And I said, no. And so I started doing that through the podcast. I'm basically exploring this for myself by interviewing experts in this field and sharing it on the podcast. And so if anyone watching this wants to find those episodes, they're all collected up in one place, and you can find those at yourparentingmojo.com/race. So those are all there. And then at the same time, I was running a membership for parents. Lucinda was among them. And I'm not saying Lucinda ever actually said these words, but a lot of the questions parents were asking were, how do I get my child to ... right? How do I get my child to stay in bed at night? How do I get them to brush their teeth? How do I get them to stop hitting me, right? All these kinds of things. And it was, for a while, it was really strange because it felt like I was on these divergent paths where I'm exploring the huge ideas, societal ideas on the podcast. And in the membership, the parents are like in the everyday struggles of parenting deep in the trenches. And eventually I realized these are not two divergent paths, that the ways that we show up in our relationships with our children shape how they go out into the world. And historically, how to succeed in the world has involved using power over others. And to a large extent today, it still does. And so I started talking more and more about these ideas. And then eventually, actually through a course that I run called Right from the Start, which is for parents with infants and young children, that I run with Hannah and Kelty of the Upbringing podcast. And this editor ended up taking the course. I didn't know that she was an editor at the time. And I found out afterwards. And I said, would you be interested in seeing a proposal from me? And she said, your coaching has changed my life. And yes, I want to publish your book. So, so it was a very different journey than many authors take. And it really sort of brings together these ideas that, yes, we have to talk with our kids about racism, white supremacy, patriarchy, capitalism as well. We can never, ever stop doing that. But if that's the only thing that we're doing, and then we are using our power over our children and our relationships with them. I mean, if you ever sworn in front of your kids and then told your kids not to swear, they remember what you do, not what you say. And so we have to kind of teach them how to be in the world without using power by being in relationships with them every single day without using power. And so that's what the book really aims to do.
Fantastic. Thank you. And I have to say, I think that the book has a wonderful title too, that you did great.
Believe me, it's a struggle to convey white supremacy, patriarchy, capitalism, and it's about parenting and be joyful and uplifting and not already taken. And it was a many month struggle.
Yes. So then, thinking about relationships in this terms of power dynamics, it's different and it's new for a lot of people. So can you elaborate just a little bit on what you mean by power and then parenting beyond that power?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, anytime that we're trying to change somebody else's behavior, and particularly our child's behavior, we are essentially using our power over them. And, it comes back to that question that the members in my community were asking, how do I get my child to, insert your situation here? And kind of inherent in that question is this idea of, well, I know best. You have to do things my way, because it's easier for me, or just because I'm so freaking tired that I just need a way to get through the day. And also more broadly, because society says that we have to get our kids to do what we say, right? That's kind of our job as parents, is to train and to socialize our children. And so there's an example actually in the book with a parent whose name in the book is Maria. And when we started working together, they were in this huge fight every morning over getting dressed. And Maria would say, get dressed, no, get dressed, no, right? Over and over again. And I said, have you ever asked your child why they don't want to get dressed? No. Okay, we'll go and do that and let us know what you find. And Maria asked her child, and the child says, because I like knowing that you were the last person to touch my clothes in the morning before I walk out the door, right? I mean, need for connection. Absolutely heart melting. Is Maria willing to help with that? Of course she is, right? Maria hugs the clothes, the child puts the clothes on, the struggle is gone. There is no more struggle. And so we can see that the child has a need for connection. So when we are able to meet that child's need for connection, then we also end up meeting Maria's needs, right? She had a need for ease. Can the mornings just be easier? Can we get out of the house without a fight? And for competence in parenting. And we're able to meet both people's needs with a simple hug of the clothes and put them on. So, so that's what I mean by parenting beyond power, because you're not trying to get your kid to do things your way. We're kind of saying, what actually is our goal here? What are we trying to do? What is your need in this situation? What is my need in this situation? My need is not for you to get dressed. It's not for you to stop hitting me. It's not for whatever I think it is. Underneath all that, I have needs for things like ease, for competence, for respect, which is, I know, a very loaded word, for rest, right? For self-care, for all kinds of things that I find nourishing. And you are a whole person too who has needs. And most of the time we can get those needs met for everybody.
So with the example that you gave, and then now Maria is in the mornings adding this to her routine of hugging the clothes and whatnot. Some people would come back and say, like, why do I, like, I'm giving in, right? I'm giving into my kid's whim, or now they're the boss. So how is this, which we hear also about, like, gentle parenting and permissive parenting. So how is this concept different from gentle parenting or that permissive parenting and now being walked all over?
Right. Yeah. So, so gentle parenting is really kind of nebulously defined. I think of what I do as sort of a part of gentle parenting, but it's really hard to know for sure just because nobody's ever kind of put a label on it. When you talk about permissive parenting, that actually fits within a framework that was developed by Dr. Diana Baumrind. And she created this kind of 4x4 quadrant using scientific research. And so when we think about permissiveness, we're looking at a place on the quadrant where we are looking at sort of a high degree of warmth toward the child and a low degree of demandingness. And so in our culture, that's not an amazing place to be, right? Because that kind of says, well, you're not doing your job as a parent. And frankly, that's not where I want to be either as a parent, because that says my needs are not being met. And so, that's not a fun place for to be in parenting. The other things on that 4x4 quadrant are authoritarian, which is the strict kind, and that's where the parents' wishes get prioritized, right? So you've got high demandingness and low warmth, and then neglectful is kind of down on low demandingness and low warmth. And so the kind of the one in the top right corner, which is always the best place to be, is authoritative parenting. And I actually did a podcast episode called "Authoritative Parenting is Not the Best Parenting Style." And it still prioritizes the parent. And we can see this when we actually dig into the research from Dr. Baumrind. She was a huge advocate of spanking. And I found this quote of her. She said, undoubtedly, some parents can be authoritative without using spanking, but we have no evidence that all or even most parents can achieve authoritative parenting without an occasional spank. And so this is the quote unquote best parenting style that we're supposed to be using. And, this is based from research from the 1950s. Research showing that kids turn out the best with this style is really kind of the best of these 4 styles. Nobody ever said these are the only 4 ways of parenting kids in the world. So, and Baumrind herself actually found another style that is so tantalizingly close to what we're talking about today. And she's like, only a few parents were using it, and she just kind of set it aside and didn't look at it again. I'm like, oh, we were so close. And she just decided not to study it anymore. And so what I say is that this entire framework, the whole permissive, authoritative, authoritarian, neglectful, the entire framework is a defunct child of the 50s that we should toss out. And instead, what if we could actually meet everybody's needs? And that, to me, I think is the part that people have a hard time with, because our culture is so set up with a win-lose mindset, right? That somebody has to win, and it's an unfortunate side effect. That means somebody has to lose. And I'm not going to let my child win, so that means I'm going to win and my child is going to lose. And so I'm saying, well, what if we just kind of stop doing that and imagine some scenarios where we could both win? And that's how this is not permissive, because it's not permissive when my needs are met and my child's needs are met as well.
Great description of all those different types, and that ability to just imagine something different that is meeting everybody's needs. And it something that you said too, around that authoritative and the authoritarian, a conversation that we had in MAR a little while ago, which kind of connects all of to this, is that, oftentimes I find that people have conflated the concepts of being a good person with being an obedient person. And that when we're doing anti-oppressive work, you can't be an obedient person because you are going to be pushing against these systems. And so it's detaching that through some of these parenting styles have really honed in that you're a good kid when you do what I say, right?
Absolutely.
So then, Lucinda, having worked with Jen for 6 years and taking in these concepts and these teachings, like how have you found that it's working for you and your family? Is it working?
Well, I was just talking with my spouse this morning when we were at the creek, and our kids were interested in trying to catch some fish and observe them for a bit. And so the two of us were sitting on the side of the creek chatting, and I said, I'm feeling some like discomfort coming up in my body. I feel afraid that I'm going to say the wrong thing, which is like very wrapped up in white supremacist culture, that there is a right thing to say, that I have to seem competent to be valuable and take up space. So I'm aware of all that. But my spouse was saying, what does it even mean that it's working? And I was like, yeah, totally. What does it mean that it's working? And so it just reminded me that for us, like through the work that I've done with Jen and that community, it's opened up my perspective to the idea of just being in relationship with my children. They are people deserving of my respect, and they are people deserving of my love and my time. And the goal is not for it to be working per se, but to have a relationship that they want to come back to. And that models healthy relationships for them in the rest of their life. And that has been like a massive shift for me. I did not come to parenting with that knowledge or that understanding. So yeah, it's been a really big shift. And any time that they call me in, or my spouse calls me in, or they call in someone else, another adult, I guess for me, that's proof that it's working, because they are speaking to the power systems in their life, and they're not afraid to do it, especially when it's me. And so to me, that's kind of evidence that it's working, because they need me, right? Like they rely on me. But they feel the most comfortable calling me in and saying, well, why are you saying we can't have screen time until we finish problem solving? Like you're using power. That's not fair. And they will literally say that to me. And that happened this weekend, which I guess is also to tell people, like, you're still going to make mistakes, because we are all like swimming in the water of these power systems all the time. And so you're never going to arrive at like, I've graduated, but like if my hope is that by having this framework in our lives and in our relationships, more and more of us can start calling each other in, and then that has like a ripple effect.
Isn't it? I love it. And, there's a part of me that's just like, ugh, when my kids like call me in on things, like I'm like, oh my gosh, I love it. It's so great. Or when I watch them notice things about other things, but yeah, it's great. It is a great opportunity. And I think too, go this to me is like an unlearning. Like you said, like we're kind of swimming in it, right? And you didn't come to parenting with this mindset. I definitely did not come to parenting with this mindset. And so there's like, it feels like piece by piece, kind of taking apart what we have digested and replacing it with something that you said. And that's so beautiful, like building that relationship that my kids want to come back to. And because like for me in my life, there's family members that I'm like, no, I need to have nothing to do with you and cut you off. And that's like a fear of mine as a parent, that like, what is my relationship going to be like with my adult children, and wanting to be mindful of that, I should say. I wouldn't say like a fear, but being mindful of that. And so really using this as a way to build that relationship. And then so what would you say is then the connection to this parenting beyond power and anti-racism work? Because you talked about challenging the systems. Because our members joined MAR because they want to raise anti-racist children, and to be anti-racist and really instill those anti-racist values in their homes. So why is, how they're parenting part of the work, and not just, what they're teaching their children?
I know Jen will have a really amazing answer, and I just wanted to say one thing as like an anecdote. I, especially as my children appearing white and having that white privilege, we have had conversations where we learn about something like eeny, meeny, miny, mo, and its origins. And I never taught them to them, and I never taught them that rhyme, but they learned it somewhere else, and they brought it back in the home. And then I was like, ugh. So we were talking about it, and one of my kids challenges me every day. Jen probably knows which one. She was like, well, I'm not Black. Like, why can't I just do it? And I was like, well, I mean, that's a great question. I mean, think about, like, I have a lot of power, right? I can drive, I have money, I have a job, I'm bigger. Like, why don't I just use that? Why don't I just, tell you that you can't do this thing and I'm going to take something away? Like, why don't I just do that? So we have these conversations, and because they are living my ever evolve, like, they remember that I used to shout more. They remember that I used to be more controlling, and they've seen that evolution, and they've heard me like own those changes. And I'm hoping that by being flawed, it connects to them not using their power. So I was like, just because, so and so, our friend, is not here to hear you doesn't mean that it's okay to use that when she's not here. So I don't know. Jen will have more to say.
Did you want to add anything to that, Jen?
Yeah, I can. And as I'm doing that, I'm wondering if, Lucinda, if you can, once I kind of give you a few minutes to think, if you would be willing to kind of say how this journey has been for you, right? Where were you when you started, and how did this journey happen? Which might help folks who are at the earlier stages of this journey see, right, how that evolution has taken place. And I guess, when I think about the idea of modeling, Carrie, you've said a couple times, your children challenge me, and it's like, and I'm thinking, okay, what's underneath that, right? You have a need for ease. Can this please just be a little bit easier? And that's a totally valid and legitimate need that can be met, right? We can find ways to do whatever it is that to meet your child's need for connection, for autonomy, for whatever it is that's going on with them, and also find a way to make it easy for you, right? Most of the time it's possible. And so when we think about, why is it hard to make this transition? my mind went back to a conversation I had with another parent. Her name is Auri. And this is an episode, if you're interested in listening to the whole thing, it's episode 213, How to Stop Using Power Over Your Child. Auri is Iranian. She lives in the US now. And she was kind of thinking a lot about this, and she and I are having these back and forth conversations about, well, I'm rewarding my child, and I'm not doing it anymore for things that I want them to be intrinsically motivated to do, but I don't care if they're intrinsically motivated to stop screaming in the shower. So I'm still gonna reward them for that. And I said, well, that's awesome that you're using fewer rewards, right? Which are a tool of power, which is saying, I know the right way for you to behave, and I'm going to reward you for doing that. And I said, well, what rewards really set up in any context is this power over dynamic. It doesn't matter about the intrinsic motivation part. That's a bonus that comes along for the ride. But if we want to get out of this intrinsic, or out of this dynamic where we are using power, then rewards don't really fit within that framework. And she was like, oh yeah. And then sometime afterwards, she told me, we actually had lunch together because she lives not far from where I live. And she said, I was thinking about all this, and every time I think about using power over my children and the reasons that I could do that, right? Because I'm bigger than you, because I'm older than you, because I've been alive longer than you, because I earn the money, because all of these things. She said, this was such a powerful moment for me. She said, every time I think about those things, I think that those are all reasons that men in Iran use to justify the oppression of women. And I said, oh, yes, yes. And that is why we are doing this, right? That is why it's so important to be in these relationships with our children in this way, because when we do this, they take it out into the world, right? I've been working with Lucinda and other parents for 6+ years now, and they are developing these needs-based relationships with other people where they don't just say, well, I'm bigger than you are and I want to do this, so we're going to do it. They say, what's your need? What are you actually trying to do here? Well, this is my need. I think we can meet both of our needs by doing this, right? We are doing white supremacy, dismantling, patriarchy, healing, capitalism, destroying work in our relationships every single day. So Lucinda, if you would be willing, right, and that's such a question that's grounded in this work, is you don't have to. Lucinda is welcome to say no to this, but if you would be willing to, and I use this with my child all the time, and that first time you hear that come back to you from your child, would you be willing to? Oh my goodness, it feels great. So Lucinda, would you be willing to share a little bit about how that evolved for you based on where you came from with no understanding of this, just like me, to where you are right now?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so many things that you said are floating around in my head. Yeah, so I have twins. I was gonna give birth to twins, and I just I knew that I wanted to parent differently than I was parented. Um, but I didn't really I was like, what? So what? I don't I don't want to use spanking. I don't want my kids to be terrified of me. But what do I do? And yeah, I tried a lot of different respectful parenting things, and that was fine for a while. I remember when one of my, well, they both turned 2 at the same time, but I remember really specifically one of them was having really big physical sort of manifestations of her feelings. And I just felt like my hands and my arms were just like, it was just like coursing through me, just this anger at, like, why won't you just do the thing? And I found, just by chance, I saw someone at a meetup where I lived who happened to be interacting with a child very differently than I had ever seen. And I was like so taken by it. I went up to the person and I was like, what are you doing? And she was like, what do you mean? I was like, you're like talking differently. What are you doing? And she said that she had read some of Magda Gerbert's work around resources for infant educators. So that kind of like set me on a path of just being like, well, there's maybe a framework here. And then, having young twins, I couldn't sit down and read books very often. So I looked for podcasts and I found Jen's. And I really feel like Jen's journey that she described, a lot of us went on, like parallel with her, because as she was learning more about systems of power, we were like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And one thing that really was a huge shift for me was when we all in the community started learning about nonviolent communication and like Ross Greene's sort of problem solving, and like those two models together and needs. And I it was like revolutionary to me. I was like, I don't know I have needs. I don't even know I had feelings other than like stressed or not stressed. Like that's all I heard growing up was like, I'm so stressed. There was like the only, emotional word that I ever heard. Um, and I remember I kept thinking that my needs were for control. Like every time I was just like, well, I just feel like, if everything's like organized and my spouse has all the snacks packed and the this and the that, then like everything's fine. And I remember it was like on a coaching call with another member that was saying that. And Jen was like, why? Like, why do you have a need for control? Like, what's under that? What's behind that? And that was like a huge shift for me, that question, why? Because I realized pretty much all of my needs were for safety. I grew up in a very challenging home in terms of not feeling safe, not feeling emotionally safe, not feeling physically safe. Um, yeah, so for me, a lot of this paralleled with like healing of like very, very deep trauma that I didn't know was there. And I feel like that's often the case, right? Um, so as I started to heal sort of the parts of me that were desperately trying to keep me safe by holding on to everything. Like if I can just plan everything and have all the things and the balls are in the air and nobody knows and nobody can see behind the curtain, it'll be fine. But like that, a lot of that was involved me like acknowledging like there's pain, there's hurt, there's relationships, there's people that I can't be in relationship with anymore because they at this point are not willing to step away from power over relationships with me or my children. So it's been like a huge kind of process. And a lot of me, apologizing and taking ownership for the ways that I used to be in my relationship with my spouse and myself and my kids. And just, yeah, it's just daily work. But it's really beautiful. It's really, really beautiful when you hear your kids, saying, like Jen said, in their play, they'll be like, well, what if nobody has to be the winner? And what if like we are all the winners in our own way? Or like, what if we're all queens and we all have different powers? Like, they have that like idea that there are different ways, that there are different paths. And really like very infrequently, only when they're like really tired or like sick or their cup is like very, very depleted for some reason, then they'll be like, yeah, I can only do it this way. And that's kind of a sign to us all that like this is not the time to problem solve because you can only see one way right now. And so let's just focus on like your very basic needs and come back to it.
That's so beautiful. And I just want to make sure that something doesn't slide by us that Lucinda mentioned very early on in the explanation, this pivotal shift that happened around, I have a need for control, which isn't really a need that masks other things, happened on a group coaching call where Lucinda was not the one being coached. And the format of these coaching calls is going to be very, very similar to the coaching calls that we will do in the Parenting Beyond Power book club. So yes, if anyone is kind of hearing this and wishing you could have similar kinds of shifts, right? There's so much value in hearing somebody else being coached, not you being the one in the hot seat having to explain the whole thing, but watching somebody else. And there's so much universality, right? You change the names, you change the exact situation. And, oh, I feel the same way. And now I see that situation differently than I did before. So yeah, group coaching is a format that I didn't realize how much power it would have when we started doing it. So it's really cool.
I can attest to it too, because I've been in group coaching calls with Jen and very similar, listening to somebody going like, you are speaking my story right now, and being able to process what's happening without maybe being as activated in the situation as I would be if it was me explaining everything. So it's a wonderful experience in being able to uncover some of those things. So I have like tons of questions based on like what Jen has just said and what Lucinda has said. But something that you said, Lucinda, about like knowing that you didn't want to parent like that. And I think that was definitely my experience of coming to that place of exploring like what else is there. And for a long time kind of fumbling with I'm just going to do the opposite, right? So then I'm now parenting out of fear essentially, or out of what I don't want, as opposed to moving towards what I do want. Which is, I coming back to these big overall systems and events that have had such impacts on Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So like, because of colonization and enslavement and assimilation, we here in Canada had the 60s scoop. I think that extended into the US as well. And then internment camps and like all those other forms of oppression. What I encounter in my generation, and a little bit older too, is that many racialized parents learned how to parent in a very strict and harsh and oppressive ways. And even now we see many racialized parents who are continuing to do that, controlling out of fear or of safety, because of those experiences, and having that desire for their children to fit in and be accepted because that's safe, right? So do you think, I mean, I have my own thoughts, but do you think for racialized parents, that they can use and benefit from parenting beyond power?
Yeah, I am going to ask you your thoughts on that in just a minute. And I also just want to encourage folks who are watching, if you have questions about anything we've talked about so far, right, do put those in the chat and then we can get to those, and then that'll kind of reduce the lag time at the end as we're asking for Q&A. So can racialized parents benefit from the methods in the book? I mean, I want to acknowledge that the reason that we have to even ask that question is because of a failure on my part, right, on Lucinda's part, on the part of white people everywhere, that we are in this system of domination. And that means that primarily it is white parents' work to do. That said, I work with a lot of racialized parents. A lot of them are actually quoted in the book. And when I had a group of parents who were kind of supporting me and pulling together stories for the book. And I actually put a question out to that community and said, do you really see this work as being relevant to you? And the response that I got back from the racialized parents in that group is along the lines of, the phrase you may have heard, internalizing our own oppression. And so when you see that condition exists, then work to dismantle systems of oppression is always valid work. And it's everywhere, right? I was just this morning eating my breakfast. I was reading a New York Times article. Obviously, for your Canadian readers and listeners, I'm sure, have heard that we have our first potential Black president. We're on the cusp of that, hopefully. And the article was recalling Representative Shirley Chisholm, who announced in 1972 that she was going to run for president. And her Black male Democratic colleagues pushed back against that because they thought that she should have gotten their approval first. Right? So there's patriarchal systems of power active even within the Black community. And so the more privilege you have, the more racial privilege you have, meaning the closer you identify to whiteness, the closer you present to whiteness, the more economic privilege you have, the more the ideas in the book are going to be relevant to you. But they are relevant to everyone who sees these systems of oppression at work in their families. And I guess the one other thing that I will say is I am obviously white. I don't have lived experience as a racialized person. I am married to a Filipino, Filipino American. My daughter's half Filipino, but I don't have the lived experience of being in that body. And so not every racialized parent is going to want to learn this from me, right? There may be other places that you think are more suitable for you to do that work. The challenge that I see with that is the vast majority of work that I see racialized authors doing is how to talk with our kids about race. And as we mentioned already, 100% necessary, 100% required work for everybody, and especially for white parents and white families. But if we are doing that work and then we're turning around and using our power to get our kids to brush their teeth, again, they're going to take the message of our actions. They're not going to take the message of our words. And so I see this work as work that white parents have to do the most. It's needed the most for us, but it's relevant to anybody who recognizes that these systems of oppression are affecting your family. But Carrie, I'm guessing you have some thoughts on this.
I do have thoughts. And I think like there are multiple different reasons why it's really important for racialized people to do this work as well. And, you know, from that systemic viewpoint of having enslavement and residential schools, colonization, and all of the other things that have passed down really poor parenting, right? And a lot of those systems were designed to break those familial bonds and those relationships. And so, you know, digging into doing this work and going back to what Lucinda said about building those relationships that your kids want to come back to, really that's what this is about. And I've said before, to me, relationship is the remedy for systemic racism. And I think just as a whole, we as humanity need to learn how to be in relationship with ourselves, with other adults, with children, and regardless of what your race is or you know, other potential you know, identity factors, marginalized or dominant, like this is work that we need to be doing. And so I think ultimately it's healing work for everybody, and the more healed that we can become, the more in community we can be, the more we can help each other, the less hyper independent we become. And so I see it as kind of a domino effect in the bigger picture. So I would say yes. Now, because I want to get all the questions in. So Lucinda, you had talked about something before too, and Jen had touched on it as well, about how this work is hard, right? Like it's healing work. It's oftentimes, and it's funny, I get a lot of times of parents coming and be like, how do I raise an anti-racist kid? And it's very similar to Jen, what you're saying of like, how do I get my kid to do this? I was like, come on in, let's have a conversation. And surprise, this is about you. It's not about your kid, right? And so it's that thing of like, oh, and now it got so much harder because when we're in that power over mindset, it's like, I'm going to tell them to do it and then that's going to be good, but I don't have to do anything myself. So I'm curious, and maybe I just answered my own question, but you know, some parents eagerly search this out, right? They like you said, are like, I don't want a parent like that. I want to find something else. And there's a lot of people who do that, but then there's also, you know, a lot of people who don't, and who aren't asking those questions, or who won't do this work. And I'm curious as to why you think that is. Why do you think some parents will do the work and others won't?
Well, I mean, I think I don't know all the reasons, but one of the things that I was thinking of when I was chatting with my partner this morning was that it is healing work, and that it is community work, and that it can be so lonely to do something that is really different You know, especially if it involves uncovering trauma, especially if it involves doing something different from like all the folks around you. I think we're really fortunate that we are in a time when we can have community long distance. You know, like the parenting group was so helpful and continues to be helpful to me. And also just, you know, really being intentional about where you first identifying my needs and then figuring out how to meet them in really intentional ways. Not looking to my family, my nuclear family, to meet all my needs is like very anti-white patriarchy work. And so that's been a really big shift, but that's hard. Like Jen has talked about this in our group. It's hard to say to your neighbors, I need help from you. It's hard when my spouse travels for work for me to say, hey, I'm going to be solo parenting for 3 weeks. And I know that that's going to be challenging. So can you come sit in my house while my kids are asleep so I can take a mental health walk? And I've done that. And that requires telling people, I find parenting alone really hard. And like, you got to say it, you know, you have to say it to ask for what you need. And I've just been saying that recently with my kids, like really the only way we can't meet our needs is if we're not able to say what they are. If we can't say to someone else what our need is, then how can we ever meet it? So I think that coupled with a lack of community are the main things that I see as barriers to this. And there can be a lot of reasons, you know, why you would not have access to community and why it wouldn't feel possible to make yourself vulnerable in that way.
Yeah, and I think that actually links very neatly to Angela's question in the chat, right? Is this feasible for single parenting? It feels like there's a lot of time required, for a lot of this work and letting go of that power dynamic. And yes, it seems like that in part because our culture has given us this idea that the nuclear family or whatever piece of it you have right now is where all of this work should happen, and that you should keep it all together with a smile on your face and look like you've got it all under control and never, ever ask for help, right? And so what if we could dismantle that idea as well and ask each other for help? I will also say, you know, I guess the two reasons I'm thinking of as to why parents might not do this work is because it seems hard and I don't have enough time, and because doing anti-racist work can feel scary. And so, you know, addressing Angela's question through that first one, my response to that is you're putting the time in either way. Right? Think back to Maria, who every morning is having this fight with her kid over getting dressed. You're putting in that time. It takes energy, it takes effort to try to understand what your needs are for the first time. Absolutely. But once you've done that, then there's no more struggle. So overall, it actually saves time and it saves energy. So that's how I would sort of address that, you know, it seems really hard. On the scary part, yes, absolutely. And I think back to a conversation that I actually did. Monica Guzman wrote a book called I Never Thought of It That Way, which is a really nice book. And I thought, well, rather than just kind of interview her about the book on the podcast, I'm going to put a message out to all my listeners and say, hey, you all know what my stance is on social issues. Who disagrees with me? Who wants to come on the podcast and have a completely respectful conversation about why we disagree? And the one person who raised her hand was an awesome listener named Lulu. And Lulu said, I think you talk about white supremacy on the podcast entirely too much. And I said, great, let's talk about that. And so through that conversation, we found that, you know, Lulu is kind of coming at this from the perspective of, well, there's nothing I can really do about it. And I'm so caught up in these day-to-day struggles. And like, I want to know how to support my kids in doing as best they can in life. Right. And of course, there we see echoes of kind of white supremacist-based thinking. And so, you know, at the end of that episode, I committed to taking more, to putting into podcast episodes really concrete steps that parents can do. And so that, you know, no matter where they are on their learning journey, there's an entry point for them. And then just recently, a listener told me, you know, when I first started listening to your podcast, I remember thinking when I heard the episodes on the social issues. Like, this doesn't interest me. I'm here to learn how to parent. And it's almost like there's this compartmentalization of, there's the parenting issues over here, and that's what I want, and the social justice issues. And we kind of think, well, if I'm colorblind and I don't see color, then I'm not contributing to the problem in any way. And eventually they may come to realize, you know, if we're kind of not acknowledging the social issues at play, then we are participating in that system. We are perpetuating that system. And once we make that shift, I think then it becomes easier to see, okay, yes, that means I have to get comfortable with talking with my kids about race. And sometimes there can be kind of a blockage too, but I'm still perpetuating systems of power. If I'm using rewards and punishments and all the other, you know, timeouts, all the other traditional parenting tools. And it can be difficult, as Angela's pointing out, right, to learn a different tool. But at the end of the day, it makes parenting easier because it makes being in relationship easier when we understand our needs and we understand the other person's needs. Because when you're trying to meet the other person's needs, they stop resisting. We don't resist when our needs are being met. So that in itself makes parenting easier.
Fantastic. And you know, something that you said, you both touched on about like being in community, and how that is so important. And I think, you know, something that we don't necessarily recognize with the tenets of white supremacy and some of the other systems of oppression, with that like perfectionism, like we got to do it perfect. And I felt myself, like as you were talking, Jen, of like, oh my gosh, this feels like so much, and I got to change all of how I do this, and I got to do it right now. And that's a sense of urgency. That's also a tenet of white supremacy, that like, no, you don't have to do it perfect. This is going to be a process, and it's not going to be an overnight process, right? And we're still going to make mistakes, and that we can work through that. But then also too, like that these systems of oppression require that hyper independence. And when we start being able to have that vulnerability and be in community with each other, we are starting to dismantle those systems already, just by that. Again, that relationship is that remedy. And so with that in mind, is there a way, Jen, that we can do this work together in community, to learn and to practice as a group?
Well, gosh, if only there was. But wait, there is. Yes, so we together are piloting the first Parenting Beyond Power book club with Mar Canada members. And so we are going to have 6 group coaching calls together. And the format that we are thinking right now, which is completely kind of open to taking things in whatever direction the group wants to go. But what we're thinking of is we're going to spend our first session doing an exercise that I do when I lead workshops on the book, which is to actually understand for real how white supremacy, patriarchy, and capitalism have affected us. And I am not going to do that by lecturing to you. I am going to help you to understand what those systems are. And I'm going to help you to see how the specific interactions you had with your own parents instilled these ideas in you, so that you can now see how the interactions you're having with your children are perpetuating those systems as well. And then we're going to sort of do a coaching session where we coach a parent kind of from start to finish using these tools, using the problem-solving approach, so that we can see how the whole thing works. And then in the subsequent 4 sessions, we're going to break it down into the individual components so you can get super, super, super comfortable with how to use them. And by the end of it, you're going to, I mean, it's going to be a deeply nourishing experience, because we're going to do this in community with others. And as you've heard from Carrie and Lucinda, doing this work with others is a relief. It's kind of, you know, it lifts a burden from us. And at the same time, it makes us feel less alone, because we see that there are other people out there struggling, maybe even in our very own communities, and we can get to meet them. and be in relationship with other people who share our values, right? And also we're learning and getting practice, and we get to, take 2 weeks and go away and read a bit more and practice and come back and say, hey, I tried this and it didn't quite work, and then get some suggestions on, okay, here's where things fell apart. Try this next time. Try it again, right? You get to come back from multiple sessions to do this over and over again. And so it's going to be enjoyable, rewarding, and it's going to be really deep work. And it's also going to be fun.
Fantastic. I am so excited. Haha, Stephanie said,
Stephanie.
so excited to sign me up, please. Yes. I just put the
Yay.
link in the chat. So you can access it there. You can sign up there. We'll be posting about it in the group as well. And it's been shared in our newsletter as well. So, and you'll get some emails from me too. Lucinda, I see your hand up. I just wanted to say, Kylie had asked a question too. Is there a way to be part of the book club, even if we cannot attend live on the Friday nights? Jen, did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I would say if you can organize, like, sit your kid in front of a movie or have a neighbor come over so that they're just kind of in the same space as you are, and you can sort of have attention focused. If you can organize some sort of date night, if you have a partner, so that you can be present with us for some of the sessions, right? I would say particularly kind of the first 1 or 2 where we are, really understanding these tools for the first time and seeing them used. And then the sessions will be recorded. So if you wanted to, if you have to plan to miss some of them, that's okay. You can watch them after the fact, but you will get a lot more out of being there live and being able to ask questions, because I'm accustomed to seeing questions come in the chat and addressing them right then and there. And you miss the chance to do that if you're not watching live. But yes, if you have to miss some sessions, then I would say that's okay. If you're planning on watching all of the sessions, it's okay. Just know that you're not going to get quite as in-depth of an experience as you will if you're actually there live.
Awesome. And so it starts Friday, September 13th. So you have lots of time. It's gonna go fast to get yourself ready for those sessions. And it's every other Friday. So not every Friday, but every other Friday. Is the book club only for MAR members? Yes. Come on over and join MAR. Just sign up and now you're a MAR member. We love everybody. But you can sign up. We're not going to hold you back. This is something that we strongly believe in, and so we want everybody to be able to participate. It's just a partnership between Mara and Jen, graciously funded by the Government of Canada. And so before we sign off, Lucinda, I saw that you had your hand up, so I want to make sure that we get to you.
Oh, it's not. Well, let me not discredit my own contribution.
Just take up space, Lucinda.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I just was thinking when earlier, I think it was Jen or maybe Carrie or both of you who were talking about some of the ways that this can be difficult and things like that. And yeah, if we're talking to our kids about these issues, but still using power over them. I just also was thinking about this, the systems of power. I think a lot about it like abusive family systems. It's like, I like to think of it as like our entire culture, sort of like a messed up family. And like there's the thought that if we're not actively hurting someone, then we're not contributing to it. But I think both with these systems of power and with abuse, like speaking to the system, speaking to them, letting your shame sort of have witnesses in these community settings is incredibly healing, and then takes a lot of the power away. So I just wanted to say that I think it's super important, especially with parenting, where we feel so much external judgment on us, right? And like we're supposed to have it all figured out. We have all of this proximity to power, and we're supposed to be good at it, and we're experts, and we're this, and we run this group. But like a couple of months ago, I really lost it and like shouted at my kids. And I felt that, wave of, oh shit, come over me. And I sat and I like breathed through it. And I reached out to people in my community, including my spouse, and just said, hey, I had a really hard experience with my kids and I just want to talk with someone about it. And so allowing a few people to like see me as human and know that I'm trying so hard to do this work and I'm still going to mess up, it makes it less hard, I think. So I think it's beautiful that you have this book club, because hopefully it will take some of the shame away and it will take some of the perfectionism away, and you'll be able to support each other to do it and keep doing it every day, even when we mess up.
Beautiful.
Yes. Lovely. Thank you, Lucinda. Yes, we will be in relationship with each other in shame healing ways as well. So, and I just want to address Monica's follow-up question, trying to do the work with my husband rather than teaching him about what I'm learning and creating that power dynamic. Yes. Partners, 100% welcome. Come on in, right? Parent, if your parenting partner is your own parent, right? If you're single parenting, whoever your parenting partner is, whoever it is really that you're parenting with, your friends, your communities, invite them all in. They can join and be MAR members. Carrie, what do you do about MAR members, like male identifying folks who want to come and do this work too?
Yeah.
They can join MAR as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So yes, absolutely. Bring folks on board. And I will say it's so much easier to do this work when you share this language with your partner, right? When you both understand that we're trying to make these shifts, when we're trying to, okay, I'm struggling right now. I can't understand what the kid's need is. Do you see it? Can you understand it? Can you see what my need is when I'm having a hard time articulating it myself, right? That's where this work gets so much easier, when we have this shared vocabulary and shared approach to doing this work.
Okay, well, I'm noticing that we are 10 minutes over time, and that's not anything new for us because that's just, I run, yeah, I don't run on time for multiple intersecting reasons. I don't run on time. But I want to be able to honor Jen and Lucinda's time. And so just want to check in with you. I would love to be able to check in with the audience to see if anybody has any burning questions before we sign off. If the two of you have like an extra 5 minutes-ish, is that comfortable for you? Okay, perfect. Thumbs up. So for everybody who is here, I appreciate you putting in your questions as we go along. Jen, that was a fabulous idea of queuing them up to questions so they're ready. But I know sometimes, if you're sitting there and you're feeling that your palms are a little bit sweaty because you know that you have a question that you want to ask, but you're feeling that nervous. You're like, oh, I might ask it wrong. Please know that there's no wrong way to ask your question here, right? We're going to avoid that perfectionism. So is there anything that anybody has on their heart, mind that they want to ask Jen or Lucinda or myself? And if
I've got a bunch of them, and you don't have enough time for it. So I guess I'll choose one if no one else has burning questions, because I know I've already kind of taken up time here. So I guess there's so much that you spoke to that I was like, yes, that's something I identify with, and that's a problem I have. And of course, like I'm coming from it in from a different space or a different culture. And so like, I love the idea of bringing your community along with your learning so that they can hopefully see the wisdom in it and like grow in that. I don't know if that's quite an option for me yet, but I really appreciated that comment as well. I guess the one question that I could maybe take up space for is asking about the health. So I love that. I also, being a person of color and my cultural upbringing, know that it's instilled in me. Like it's something that I do not do well. I do not ask for help well, because I feel like it's charity, no matter how much I know it's not for the most part, even now. saying it with kind of like a very long end there. But I just, it's very difficult. Essentially, I ask for help when I have no other choice, which at that point, it does kind of become charity. So anyway, I'm sure we'll be able to ask this and more questions later on. I will definitely be coming to the book club, but maybe you can touch on that as well, just because it was brought up today.
Yeah. Maybe I can take a first run at it, and then Carrie or Lucinda may have thoughts as well. I guess, firstly, I'm glad we're going to get to keep working together. And when we ask for help, we do the hardest part of the work to make it possible for somebody else to ask us for help. Because on the other side of that request is another person who is thinking to themselves, I can't ask for help, right? The other person does not have capacity for this. They're not going to be able to help me. They might, even if they can, they might say no. And that's really scary for me to have someone say no to me, right? And that's some work that we can do internally to understand why it's so hard for us to have people say no to us. But we're taking, when we don't even ask them, we take away their option to be able to say yes. And we also make it so that they are feeling unwilling, unable to ask us for help too. So what if you were to not consider this charity, but consider it a way to enable your neighbor, your friend, whoever it is, to be able to ask you for help? Does anything shift inside you when you consider it from that perspective? And that was not a rhetorical question, Angela. Feel free to respond.
No worries. Yes, it definitely does. I also then look at it as like owing someone something, or for them to, anyway. But yes, I do agree that I may be taking the opportunity for them, even if they did have the time and space to do it. And so I always think of it as like owing. So, even with my siblings, if I say needed a sit, maybe just so that I could just go for a walk, if I ask them to do that, am I taking that away from when I really need it?
Yeah,
it's like,
because you are only deserving of a finite amount of care from other people.
Yeah. I know that's not a true thing, or I guess I'm learning that it's not a fact that it's only a finite amount. It's definitely really hard to like shift that thinking, I guess.
If I can add to that a little bit, I saw something by an Indigenous person who is very wise, and my brain is blanking on exactly who it was, but they were talking about our elders and our ancestors and the culture that they created, and how do we discern the difference between trauma that has been incorporated into a culture and what was actually that culture. And, looking at your question about like not being able to ask for help or that vulnerability, knowing that as human beings, we are relational beings. To me, I would be curious, and I think to this quote, I looked it up, that Resmaa Menakem, he wrote a book called My Grandmother's Hands, and this quote like sticks with me. He says, many times trauma in a person decontextualized over time can look like personality. Trauma in family decontextualized over time can look like family traits. And trauma decontextualized in a people over time can look like culture. And it takes time to slow it down so you can begin to discern what's what. And so I would be curious in that, is that culture of don't ask, don't be a burden, true to culture, or is that come about because of different things that have happened that have now shaped the way that your family or extended family responds to society?
Mm. Yeah. I'm gonna go read that book and get back to you.
Great book.
And yeah, I could definitely see that. And I try to make my daughter Olivia to make sure that she knows that she can interrupt me if she needs to, that she can ask for what she needs, that she can speak up for herself, and that it's not finite, that she is deserving of all of my attention and of everyone else's attention too, in the classroom, her teachers, that sort of thing. So this is kind of one of the things I want to unpack. So I will read that before the book club.
And if I could just offer, you're telling your daughter that, and yet it's so hard for you to model asking for help, right? And so what Carrie's essentially saying is it possible that that person who can't ask for help isn't really you? That underneath that trauma is a person there who can ask for help. But can we heal those experiences so that that real you can come out and be seen and heard and get help? I think Lucinda wanted to add as well.
Oh, I just wanted to, like, with consent, offer like a virtual hug to you, Angela, because that is, you know, obviously we are coming from very different spaces and experiences and bodies. But you just articulated like exactly where I was a couple of years ago, of like, but I can't, you know, but like I'm, you know, and it's exactly what Carrie was saying. You think certain things about you are fixed. And even for me with like gender identity, like you think certain things about you are fixed. And when you peel away all of that trauma and all of that pain and all of that performance that you're doing to stay safe or to be successful, or, you know, whatever you've been taught by society, your family, et cetera, that you have to do, who are you under that? And that's where it's like really beautiful and like liberation work, you know, it's like all of this, all these systems. It's like, I don't know, I say to my spouse a lot, it's like once I started learning this stuff through the work with Jen and that community, I can't not see it anymore. And it's everywhere. And so, yeah, like being able to take up space, being reminded by people who love me that I can take up space, then it allows other people to take up space in my presence. And it allows my children to take up space. It allows my spouse to say, I'm tired, I'm going to lie down, you know, just all of that work. And I always want to, like Carrie said, attribute it back to communities of color, that they are the ones, you all are the ones who initially had it right with community care, you know? So yeah, I just think it's a constant unlearning and relearning.
Well, thank you for that. I really appreciate it. I'm excited to carry my little.
We are excited to
No.
have you as part of the book club.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
And Stephanie, you have your hand up, and then we will sign off after this.
Can we hear or see me?
Yes.
All right. I might have a 3-year-old run in while I'm trying to have this question, but it'll be fine. One of the questions, and I think it ties also into what you're speaking to right now, is that like my partner is white, and so some of the, and we're doing this work differently, but together in different ways. One of the things that comes up for me a lot, and I'm wondering how the book club will help with that, is that like obviously my experience is different than my partner's experience, and so as we're raising our 2 kids, one of the things that I often get triggered by is that like I feel like sometimes my partner has the luxury, because she's a white woman, to have like this kind of damsel in distress kind of, like she can ask all the questions and nothing is like that's okay in a sense. But then our kids are mixed race kids, and I find myself being like, I don't want them to learn that because there's not the same innocence that's going to be bestowed to them. So how do I kind of, there's that like, how do I kind of balance those things, knowing that the reason why they don't have that innocence is not their fault, and it is white supremacy and all those things in the culture. And at the same time, realizing that like my partner has a different privileges than them, and not like fearing them, making them like, you can't ask that question or you can't say it that way, but also letting them have awareness to that. Like it's so hard sometimes where I'm just like, I just want them to be kids, and I know my partner's perspective is her perspective, but they can't go in the world and just kind of be like, I don't know, or like, let everybody will help me, and I'm like, not everybody will. Yeah. So I'm
Mary, did you
curious.
want to take
Yeah.
that first, and I can speak to it after?
So can I clarify the question of like how will the book club be able to hold space for both of those experiences? Is that the
Yeah.
question?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think, I mean, really, each individual person who comes to the book club, even if they are of the same race, are going to have their individual experiences, their individual needs, and their individual triggers. And so it's something that for me, my experience in working with Jen and doing group coaching, like we said, it's that opportunity to sit and witness and work through how this shows up for us in our lives. And even just listening to the stories and the impact of others cross-culturally allows for awareness in a way that would be different than me telling my husband, who's white, my experience, which comes loaded with like the dynamics in our relationship, versus him being able to hear that from someone else too, and then going, oh, because it's less threatening when it's someone else being able to listen. So I think, again, doing that in community and being able to have that is helpful. And it's helpful. And then that, in a way, another Black person in the group might be calling your partner in on something that would be received differently in that way than if you were calling them in. And so it really is a beautiful experience in that way. Or another white person. Yes, exactly. Exactly. So I don't know, Stephanie, if that answers your question.
Yes, that definitely answers part of my question. I'm curious about other commentary too. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess, what I'm thinking is, does this have to be your work to do, Stephanie, to do all this explaining, right? Can I take some of that load for you? Can the other white parents in the community and the discussions that we're having and your partner participate in those discussions take some of that load, so you're not the person who is having to be the one who's educating your partner on these kinds of things? That's a huge goal of our work together is, people of color have been telling us forever, listen to us and do this work yourselves. So that's a big part of what we're doing together, is understanding how the ways that we are in relationships with others perpetuates these systems, and getting the super practical tools. Like, what we're going to spend most of our time talking about is, the answer to the question, how do I get my kid to brush their teeth? So it's the super practical daily parenting struggles that you're having that we're going to talk about. And then, throughout, we're going to weave it back to, okay, how is this connected to these broader systems? When we do it this way, how does that disrupt these systems, right? It's going to be like a spider's web of threads running out to the broader culture, centered on these interactions that we're having with our children on a daily basis. So does that help? I'm happy to respond if you have more questions.
No, that's beautiful, because I do believe that's one of the things that I've realized. Like, I don't want to continually be in the system of giving away BIPOC folks like free labor, but they are my kids, and that is my partner. And so there is some free laboring. And we've had that conversation. And what would be lovely of this group is that my partner would see other like white folks, white passing folks, like doing this work and calling her in to kind of do it for herself as well. Yeah.
Yep. You're in the right place.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, having been on a lot of coaching calls with Jen, like, she does that well, and has, you know, has called me in on things, and I think it will, if your partner comes as well, it will hopefully alleviate some of that burden on you, and hopefully help your partner realize that one of your needs is, you know, for I don't know, for ease, for like freedom from that burden. And that she needs to meet her needs for education and information elsewhere. So like for in my relationship with my spouse, it has been like just totally breathed like different life into our relationship. And I think maybe our marriage wouldn't have survived like my gender transition, but we have this framework to talk about needs. And hopefully it will help your spouse to realize that like you have an unmet need. And even if she has one as well, it's not your job to meet it.
Yeah. Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again, Jen and Lucinda, for sharing your time with us today and your expertise and lived expertise and opinions and thoughts. I've really appreciated the conversation, and it is totally just really got me excited for the book club. I can't wait for that to start and to be able to continue having these conversations. And Lucinda, if you wanted to sneak in and be part of the book club, you would be welcome.
I was literally just thinking, like, I'm so sad. You all are so awesome.
You're in, Lucinda. We'll make it happen.
Yeah. Wonderful. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for spending some time with us. Thank you for staying a little bit longer to be part of the conversation. And I really do look forward to doing this work with you starting in September.
Me too. Thanks for hosting, Carrie. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.